Hello, welcome to the Politics Chicks podcast. I'm Monica Healy.
And I'm Christy Branham.
We talk a lot about the need for women in leadership, but what if the real issue starts much earlier? What if it's about whether girls even see themselves as leaders in the first place?
Today we're joined by Sarah Jakle, founder of Democrashe, an organization focused on helping high school girls and women more broadly build the confidence, resilience, and skills to step into public life.
Her work combines leadership training with something you don't often hear about in politics: brain science and trauma resiliency to make leadership feel accessible instead of intimidating. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Monica.
We're so excited to have you here. Let's get this discussion going. So, Sarah, why don't you give us a quick snapshot of who you are and then what Democrashe is so our listeners have a better understanding about you and the organization?
Sure. So I was a social worker who, after the election of 2016, became a social worker for the country and ended up being a national outreach director for a voter registration group called Field Team 6 and the Get Out the Vote director for the California National Organization for Women. And that is where I saw what women go through when they are considering candidacy and when they become candidates. Quick snapshot, which we already know, it is much harder for women to see themselves as candidates. Women and men with the same resume, men are twice as likely. And when they do step up into public service, they get up to 10 times more harassment and bullying than male candidates. So this really pissed me off. And it pissed me off. And I have a master in public policy, but I do have that master in social work. And I thought, what if we trained women to not only know that running for office is their birthright, but gave them evidence-based practices to help them step out of their comfort zone, to consider themselves, and also to protect their inner lives when someone is pushing back at them. What kind of world would we see if we did that and started in high school and Democrashe was born?
Well, can you talk a little bit about that high school piece? Because I've heard another podcast where you focused on why high school is so important.
Yeah, high school is very important. So there were two main reasons that led me to high school. One is when I started talking to adult women about the evidence-based practices I was mentioning that help support you and protect you and encourage you, I kept hearing, I wish I knew this in high school. What would my life have been like if I could talk to myself in an encouraging way, if I could shift the inner critic, if I could regulate my nervous system if someone is dysregulating at me? And it made me look into high school, which is where I found that high school is the last time boys and girls think they can run for office equally. It is the exact time to start working with them and make sure they keep sprinting forward rather than stalling and having to get restarted later in life. It's much easier just to keep your momentum. So those were two of the main reasons I focused on high school. And also the high school brain is super neuroplastic, which just means it wires things very easily. And it's the right time to give the brain new skills that then will carry forward in a woman's life.
What I love and what I'm hearing just immediately as this conversation has begun is the holistic approach that you're using to work with these girls to not only rewire their brains that, yes, they are capable of leadership, but also to learn to protect and take care of their inner selves and how to be resilient if someone does push back at them. So I love that. I think we all could have benefited. I wish I could tell my high school self that. So I think it's really cool.
Christy, I think so many of the adult women I work with, amazing, brilliant, capable women are, and tell me if this sounds a little familiar, overwhelmed and exhausted. Especially these days, overwhelmed and exhausted.
Yes.
And by getting to girls early with skills to regulate your nervous system, right? To regulate yourself and take care of yourself, you start protecting yourself early from overwhelm and exhaustion. And I saw too many women who were struggling with that. And I fiercely believe that women deserve not only to lead, but to be happy. Women deserve to thrive and feel powerful and confident and like they are guarding their inner lives and they're in control of how they're responding. And I think that, as much as anything, made me go after high school.
And what are these girls learning explicitly or implicitly about leadership by the time they reach high school? So, in those earlier years, what are they integrating?
And that's separate from what we do in Democrashe. But I think in high school, one of the things that girls learn about leadership is it is competitive, it is a competition. There are so few spots in colleges these days. And for girls who are going after colleges, if you do something good, that is a direct threat to me because we're both going for the same spot. And so it gets baked in, this kind of scarcity model to leadership. And one of the things I wanted to do in Democrashe is open a space, an all girls supportive space, where these are your sisters right away. These are your sisters, and her victory is your victory, just as your victory is her victory. You're not getting a grade, you're not going for an award. We are trying to learn. One of the things we ask all the time is, what are you proud of your sister for? She just gave a
That is
speech,
so
and what
cool.
did you love about it? So I do think trying to reset the scarcity model of leadership that really is endemic to high school to more of a big-hearted model where women lift women.
I love that, to
I
build
do
each other
too.
up rather than to tear each other down.
Right? It's so important to learn that young.
What
Right.
differences do you see between girls who do see themselves as leaders as opposed to those who might not necessarily see themselves in leadership positions?
I think that is a really complicated question that gets at the heart of the fact that there is a radiant spectrum that makes up women. And within that spectrum, there are many different barriers depending on what you face. For example, girls of color test really high on leadership aptitude tests, but are not as likely to be found in leadership positions because they get very different pushback. So I think you really have to think about all the different barriers that different women face. And one of the things we do in Democrashe is one of those barriers is being from a low income background. And you can't be in leadership positions because you have to work. So one of the things that we do is offer a stipend. So we pay you $15 an hour to participate with us. Because if
Wow.
America is truly to reflect all of her people, then we need to think about these early barriers to entry and what keeps girls, ambitious, bright, amazing girls, out of leadership. And one of those is they can't afford unpaid internships and they have to work. So we
Yeah.
are 70% first generation American, 90% girls of color. And we see over and over girls who can come and learn from us and start in the pipeline toward democracy because we are a paid opportunity.
I love that. And as
I do too.
an educator in a predominantly female-led field, it irks me to no end that student teaching is an unpaid internship. So we expect these students that are going to go in and be responsible for the creation of all these genius minds to go do it for free. And not even for free, but to pay to do it. So I love that you are looking into that piece, the financial piece, to pull those people in for that.
Yeah, and a lot of these young women are helping support their families too. So they need that income to help bring in extra just to make ends meet. So you talked about the neuroplasticity part of it, which is something that really fascinates me. Neuroplasticity is such a broad topic, and I'm sure we're not even going to touch the top of the iceberg of it. But I'm assuming that has something to do with my next question, which is, why is it so important to start this work before adulthood?
So many reasons. Neuroplasticity is one of them, right? Because the brain wires quickly and easily. I think a lot about a Desmond Tutu quote about how we cannot just pick logs out of the river. We have to stop them from falling in. And I think when we intervene early, we're giving women a chance to change the trajectory of their lives because of the way that they can start to internalize and see themselves in the tools they learn. The Democrashe motto is, you can't do it wrong. you can't do it wrong because no matter what you learn, and sometimes it is our mistakes that open up the biggest doors. So a young girl who's learning, I can't do it wrong, is starting to fight the perfectionism that is endemic in high school girls and in women.
Yep.
I can't tell you how many women I know that describe themselves as recovering perfectionists because that's the way we're socialized. So getting early to a girl who's being socialized into this perspective, into this perfectionistic area, which makes what we call her resiliency zone very narrow, what feels comfortable, and stepping outside that feels unsafe. Whereas men are socialized to have much bigger resiliency zones, to try, fail, try again. And so when we get to girls early, like in high school, and start widening those resiliency zones, you are changing what feels okay to try, what feels brave, what feels ambitious as opposed to unsafe. So once that starts in high school, you are affecting every decision that woman is going to make. I had a girl who wrote at the end of a Democrashe workshop that the way she had used Democrashe was to stand up for herself for the first time at Starbucks. And I was like, you have me interested, right? Because most of our
Right.
graduates are like, I ran for office at school and I started a nonprofit. She stood up for herself at Starbucks because she took her resiliency skills of grounding with Mother Earth, which pulls you from the amygdala, which I will get into in brain science, back to your prefrontal cortex, pulls you into your body. She checked in with her inner best friend who encouraged her to stand up for herself. And she told them that the drink was wrong. This sounds so tiny, but she said, I stood up for myself for the first time. And once a woman starts having tools to stand up for herself, she'll stand up for herself in a relationship. She'll stand up for herself in a negotiation. She will stand up for herself going for a promotion. And so I love that girl who stood up for herself at Starbucks. I consider her just as much a success as the girl who became the youngest elected official in Maryland.
And I think we all know people like that would shrink from any sort of confrontation and just melt into the background. And you're right that it's those little building blocks. And that is as big a measure of success as the student class president. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can personally relate to that also because I just remember when I was young being told just you need to learn to deal with things. It's not always going to go your way. So just understand and make sure everyone else is around you is okay. But if it goes wrong for you, just let it go. So I love that self-advocacy that you're promoting for girls and to hear these conversations that you're having with girls now to stand up for themselves, to be independent, to be self-reliant. I think that is just amazing. And I would have given both my arms to be able to have that in high school. So this is exciting. I'm glad we are having this conversation and I'm getting more and more excited as we're going along here. So
Well, let's talk about your brain science because you alluded to that earlier and said that we would get to that. So, talk about that. How do you use brain science in your work and what does it actually mean in practice?
Yeah. So I threw out a word called the amygdala, and I'd love to take your listeners on a super quick tour of the brain. So, in the front of our brain, we have our prefrontal cortex, where we are aware of our thoughts, it's irrational thoughts, and we often think that's the whole brain. But toward the back of the brain is something called the amygdala, which connects to a whole limbic system, but we'll just stay with the amygdala. And the amygdala is constantly, unconsciously scanning your world for threats. And it is the fight, flight, freeze part of the brain. The reason why this is so important is back in cave person days, the amygdala learned that something unknown was potentially dangerous. Because if you think about it, if there's a cave person who sees something on the path that she doesn't know what that is, the cave person that goes up and picks it up gets bitten and dies. And we did not get her genes. The cave person who freaks out and run away, we got her genes. The reason why it matters that unknown tracks is dangerous is Christy and Monica think of what is still unknown spaces for women. Congress is only 28% women. Boardrooms are not women. CEOs make up 3 to 5% are female CEOs. The walls don't look like us. The pictures, when they have the history of the people, all of those are men. The history books are men. That amygdala is tracking its surroundings and saying, this is unknown. And when an amygdala tracks as unknown, it becomes cautious and avoidant. So we see people hesitating to raise their hands, hesitating to go for a promotion. If an amygdala tracks safety, this looks like me, nothing is out, you become motivated and excited to explore further, which is men. They self-select into candidacy. They raise their hand. They have too much confidence than they deserve.
Yes, they do.
Yeah,
So
they do.
if we know that, though, we need to help women's amygdalas be allies, because the amygdala has a different language. If you just say to yourself right now, stop worrying, just cut it out, just stop. Did that work?
No.
That never works.
No, doesn't work. You're using a conscious language to deal with an unconscious process. She doesn't understand that. The amygdala is somatic. So yoga, grounding, physical contact, making physical contact, that's a language that settles the amygdala. Self-compassion, the tone of compassion, is something that settles the amygdala. Switching from your inner critic, as Democrashe girls do, to an inner best friend. And what would your inner best friend say? Brings that compassionate, supportive tone that settles the amygdala and starts to make it your ally. Because the prefrontal cortex is all in for ambition. It wants to go for it, is excited, but it's in dissonance with the amygdala, which is unconsciously being like, but wait a minute, this does not look like me. I don't know about this. And so one of the things that we do in Democrashe is teach amygdala skills alongside all the practical public policy skills about calling your representative or getting involved in local action or advocating for issues or being in Democrashe Congress. We tie all the things that we do to grounding, to inner best friend, to something called savoring the good, where you gently ask your brain to notice things that are beautiful and joyful, because it switches from negativity bias, which is that cave person brain again, toward a positive outlook, which starts making decisions that say yes, because I see things that are possible. I see things that are positive. We want a woman's whole brain to be our ally, and we want to destigmatize for women who blame themselves when they hesitate to raise their hand or when they are cautious and avoidant about going for a promotion. You are not a bad leader and you're not a bad feminist. Your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. And we can gently redirect it back toward a positive way to see your ambition as something safe and exciting.
It feels like a roundabout way of teaching people to be confident.
Yes.
It is, because it's not just saying the verbal words, you can do it. That is a prefrontal language and the amygdala doesn't hear it. So the more we just say things like, absolutely you can do it, go for it, girl power, that only reaches prefrontal cortex. So a way to teach deep, abiding, lasting confidence is addressing the amygdala who is hesitating, who is the one who's hesitating, and making sure she feels safe so you can be your authentically confident self.
When you work with a group of high school girls, like what's the time frame that you're working with them, and how does a high school get to work with you?
So we don't work with high schools specifically. We are our own 501c3, our own nonprofit. And there are so many ways to engage with us. So we are online because of two reasons. One is for girls with nothing like this around them. They just open their phone or their computer and they find a community of sisters that has their back, that believes that they can be a congresswoman and teaches them the skills. And the other reason to be online is right now we put 42 states together in a room. And many of our states are almost being siloed off into different countries. And there's this kind of cross-cultural exchange that happens when girls from California are talking to Texas, or talking to Oklahoma, or talking to Missouri, or talking to New York. So girls are coming outside of the bubble that many of them are in high school, or if they're only doing in real life or in-person things. And they're hearing what women all around the country are going through, and they are supporting each other and encouraging each other and giving advice. And it's this kind of cross-cultural exchange that used to be different countries that is now different states. And when we build legislation together in Democrashe Congress, we build across states. So different states with different lived experiences work together in a yes and model to go towards something that could truly be national. We have a 10-week program of 2 hours a week. We have a 1-day intensive, which is coming up in the summer. And we have a completely free self-directed curriculum available 24/7 on our website to learn all of these skills.
I love that these girls get this opportunity to experience other cultures, other identities. As a kid that grew up in the 80s in South Dakota, that was not even remotely a possibility. So I love that they're getting to see that.
Sarah, I think something else I find fascinating is that you train both teens and adults in trauma resiliency. What is it, first of all, and why is that relevant to leadership?
So we live currently in a very traumatic time. And the constant 24/7 news cycles are causing both girls and adults to go into either hyper arousal, where you get stuck in anxiety and you can't come out, or something called a hypo arousal, where you collapse and you start hearing things like, I can't talk about politics anymore. I can't think about this. I can't watch it. I can't read it. It's just too much. And it's no one's doing anything wrong. That is a human body that's getting flooded, that is getting overwhelmed. And so I think I started to step into spaces to teach more trauma skills, not processing trauma skills, which can only be done by a licensed mental health professional, but more community trauma skills. One of them is called titrating, right? So titrating is understanding that you can't live in the hard feeling. You'll get flooded and overwhelmed. So titrating is doing something in line with your values, and then consciously taking a break and going into the garden and looking at the beautiful flowers, and then going back and doing something that is slightly out of your comfort zone toward your values, and then petting a puppy dog. So noticing yourself able to move back and forth, and noticing that when you do take a break from being in service of your values, you are not doing anything wrong. You're not letting anybody down. You are using a trauma skill that will keep you able to keep doing this long term. So things like that, because this is one of the most overwhelming times, just overwhelming. And it does not help that we have access to news throughout in the day and night, and the algorithms feed us what they feed us. So I care so deeply about women who are going through these times, and wanted to help bring a little of this into these, especially civic spaces.
You've worked with so many women and girls, and what's the moment when something clicks and you see that in coming into their own power?
There are so many moments. I think one of the ways that I see it click is we have a peer-led model. So our girls go through the program and then come back and lead it. And they have a tremendous amount of responsibility. They run 2-hour workshops, they run 5-hour workshops, and they handle breakout rooms. And seeing girls who are nervous coming in, and before the workshops, I tend to say to them, all we do, we prepare the best we can. We love these girls with all of our hearts. And then we completely let go of outcome, because we cannot control how it lands in the room. And then we learn. So we prepare, we love, we let go, and we learn. And watching a girl on the other side light up, because she did lead the breakout rooms, and she did handle things that came up, and she did run an entire workshop, and she did mentor these girls. I think it's one of the most delightful things to talk to the peer leaders and watch their confidence build and watch them be brave and use their tools like inner best friend to encourage them to be brave and do things they thought they couldn't do, run a whole workshop, and then see that they absolutely can.
You've mentioned inner best friend a few times. Do you want to talk more about that?
Inner best friend is my deep diving into the self-compassion research of Dr. Kristen Neff for about 10 years, who has a lot of amazing meditations. And one of the things that I think we're all super aware of is the inner critic. The inner critic tends to chime in and say, this isn't your time. You can't do this. It's not going to go well. And again, this has an evolutionary background. Thinking negatively was very helpful back in cave person days. It kept you alive, not as helpful now. And so inner best friend is kind of a hack where we name the inner critic, we notice the inner critic, but we identify that person. It can be a real person, an imaginary person who you would want to have your back, who makes you feel seen, heard, and valued, that you can ask, what would my inner best friend say? So my inner best friends are Barack Obama and my puppy dog, Branch. And so before I sit down to a podcast with two hosts I really admire, I take a moment and say, what would Barack Obama say? And he is so encouraging.
That's awesome.
And he is so hopeful. And he talks to me about the many times he put himself out there on behalf of things he believed in. And that's what you do as a community leader, right? You put yourself out there, you're brave, you say your ideas, and he did it, and he encourages me. And the girls learn before they're going to do something difficult. When the inner critic sneaks in, you're not going to win the election at your school. You're going to fail this test. You're never going to get into this college. To shift that to, what would my inner best friend say about this? And it's something that you then carry with you, right? Because even when you go off to college, and maybe your inner best friend is a teacher who now you don't have physically there, but she's always with you because you can always ask and call on her wisdom. And it's something we have inside of us to encourage us. And it shifts away from that inner critic.
Now I'm going to be thinking about who my inner best friend should be.
I'm going to make a list after we're done recording this podcast and figure out who my inner best friend needs to be.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And I imagine that must have an impact on the serotonin making part of the brain where you get that dopamine hit when you feel empowered. So then it encourages you to keep doing things over time to keep getting that type of reinforcement.
Not only do you get that type of reinforcement, but there's a lot of research that shows if you do something new or you want to build a habit, it's really important to celebrate yourself on the other side of doing something new or doing the habit. But it can feel very awkward to be like, I'm celebrating myself versus what would my inner best friend say about what I just did? And then you get all this encouragement and reinforcement. And I'm so proud of you and you're so amazing. And it acts as that celebration that starts to wire bravery into habit.
I love that. I absolutely love that.
So I talked a little bit about in a civic and elected spaces, right? Women doubt themselves and they get up to 10 times more pushback. But it's true in every space. There was recently an article that high-performing women get 76% of high-performing women get negative feedback. Guess what percent of high-performing men get negative feedback?
Really
0.
small. Yeah.
2%.
2. It is 2%. 76% versus 2%. KPMG found that 75% of all women executives identify with imposter syndrome. And then, of course, we all know things like women are not paid equally. Childcare is not made available, right? Women who are bossy are perceived as rude, right? Women who are strong are perceived as aggressive. I have 2 stories that I feel like capture this so perfectly. One is there was this amazing woman of color who was at her own promotion party to get a really big promotion when a male inferior inferior colleague asked her to get him coffee at the party.
Oh, jeez.
Her party.
Oh my God.
So that is like, and it's thousands of those cuts. It's thousands of those cuts. There was a Latina mayor in the Midwest who did everything right. She was a social worker. She decided she wanted to fight for her community. She ran for office. She won. She became mayor. And you think that's where the story ends. When she spoke to the Democrashe girls, she talked about how when she introduced herself to her constituents as the mayor, the most common response she got was, "No, you're not."
What?
No, you're not. And she would finally say, "Google it," and watch their face kind of change as they're like, "I will Google it." And then they Google it and then they're like, "Oh, it is the mayor." Like, it's the mayor.
Yeah.
But it was so exhausting to have to relitigate that she was the mayor every single time that she didn't really want to run for re-election. I think it is 1,000 tiny cuts. And part of the resiliency skills we teach in Democrashe are like, I would have loved that mayor to have access to grounding. So when someone is saying something like that, she puts one hand on her chest, she feels her feet on the floor, she comes back into her own body and gets access to her prefrontal cortex, who says this person is an idiot. How do I want to respond? Who do I want to be in this moment? Not what do I get triggered into with fight, flight, freeze because of the rudeness and disrespect, but how do I protect who I am and what I want to stand for? And those are skills, right? Those are skills to teach about regulating nervous systems and things like that. And so because we know women face this kind of pushback, that's why I wanted to start a nonprofit that teaches these kinds of skills as part of being a leader. Because we can't pretend we don't know what's coming. We need to prep women for it.
I think there's so much to be said about that and the different expectations and the different perceptions of women versus men in leadership roles. So I love that those kids are getting that. Let's shift gears a little bit. We're all about empowering women here. And representation does matter. And as a teacher, I always said that to the kids. It was so important for all of our students to see themselves in what we were teaching. So let's pretend that we're creating a new Mount Rushmore. And who are the figures that you're going to put on a new Mount Rushmore?
Oh my goodness. I feel like there's so many different women that come to mind, honestly. So I will say the first one that comes to mind, and this is not a political figure, but Megan Rapinoe.
Oh, yeah.
Who was the soccer
player
who fought for pay equity and is such a badass. I would like to actually see her up there. This is also a total out of left field, but Shonda Rhimes was, she wrote Scandal and Grey's Anatomy, and she for the first time made a television that looked like America. She was very brave and bold before other people were to truly put a reflective country up on her screen and just stand boldly behind it. I would love to see her recognized. Jeanette Rankin was the very first congresswoman ever elected. I'm going to say the wrong date, but I want to say it was 1913, around then. But Jeanette Rankin, I think, deserves to be up there as the very first woman ever elected to Congress. And then I would say we didn't get to talk about inner champions, which is another thing we teach, but Stacey Abrams.
Yeah.
I would love to see Stacey Abrams up on that wall.
That would be a great monument for sure.
I love that you could just pick them off like that. We've asked a couple other podcast guests that question, and they sit there and they're like, and you're like, nope, Megan Rapinoe, moving right on to Shonda Rhimes and Bridgerton. So yeah, no, that was awesome. All right. Are you seeing more urgency or engagement from young women right now? I'm going to the District 8 convention this coming weekend. And when we go to political events, like we hosted a political event here in the Twin Cities, 2 weeks ago now? Almost 3 weeks ago now. Predominantly it was women that were there, even though we had multiple male candidates there speaking. So are you seeing more urgency and engagement from young women? Because we're certainly seeing it from our end.
Well, and I would jump in and point out that the vast majority of protests are women.
Yes.
It's all women.
I think when I was working on the ground in 2018, it was 99% women. I think we thought maybe after the 2024 election, young women would feel so dispirited that we'd see a drop in applications. But in 2024, before the election, we got about 3 times as many applications as we have spots for. And after the election, now we get 7 times as many applications as we have spots for. So I do think there's a real fire under young women to find their community, find a place where they can make a difference, find a place where they can be seen, and start thinking about what our future would look like if they were in it.
I totally believe you, because we talked about this before we came on the podcast, that Monica and I are supporting multiple candidates running for Congress in Minnesota. Actually, we're supporting people running all over the country, but obviously we're Minnesotans, so these races are really important to us because we have a lot of seats to flip. We have a lot of great candidates. Only one is a woman. And we love the candidates that we're supporting, but I hope that these women coming up are going to be more willing to step into that unknown space that you're talking about, that unsafe space, and be brave and do things that they maybe would not have done prior to going through your program. So
I just want to share that we do pre-post tests for the 10-week program, so snapshots before and after. And before Democrashe, only 30% of girls can see themselves as candidates. And after Democrashe, that is 85%.
Wow.
So it's the kind of thing that has to shift first. You can't be what you can't see. And to see yourself as a candidate is the first step toward whether or not they ever run. Supporting women candidates, voting for women candidates, getting out there and being candidates themselves. It's this internal shift that we have to help girls have even earlier.
You're working with high school age girls. So if you could go back to 16-year-old Sarah, what would you tell her?
16-year-old Sarah went to an all-girls high school. And I think I would tell her, don't take for granted what it's like to see women in all the different spaces of power and how much that is impacting you. And I think I would tell her, guess what? You're going to try to do this when you're much older and create a similar all-girl space where women take up all the leadership roles and get this same thing that is impacting you so much right now. I think I would just say, wait for it, because it's coming.
So cool.
Do you have any final words you want to share with our listeners?
I would love people to check out our website at democrashe.org. There's so many ways to be involved as mentors for the students, sharing our application. We have the summer intensives coming up. Obviously, if you can donate $10, $20 a month, that's the kind of thing that lets us do this work. And then please find me on LinkedIn. If you have any ideas of people I should talk to or ideas for me, I love to hear it.
Sarah, we're going to put the links to Democrashe in the show notes, as well as I'll put your LinkedIn profile too, so that people can find that more easily. And I want to thank you for the work you're doing and reminding us that leadership doesn't start when you run for office.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you, Monica. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Exactly. It starts much earlier with whether you believe your voice matters in the first place.
And when we invest in that belief, especially in young women, we change everything that comes afterwards.
And that's how real, lasting change begins. Thanks, Sarah. If this conversation has resonated with our listeners, please comment and share. It helps more than you know.
And follow us everywhere at The Politics Chicks on Substack, Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.
Keep shining your light so we can find each other in the dark.
And remember, we're always stronger together. Sarah, thank you so much for this amazing conversation today. I think a lot of people are going to be really excited when they walk away from this podcast.
And thanks for what you do.
Thank you. All right, we'll see you later.